we get my kids, we hop in the van together, we go see a movie. Now, the thing that I want from you has not changed, right? It's not like I've given up my goals. I still wanted you to come to the movies with me. I still asked for the very same thing from you. But the way that I went about it was totally different. It was diametrically opposed to the other way. And you know what is amazing about this is I took the time to really involve and connect with you based on what you were interested in. We actually, in a sense, built a relationship and a connection based on a common interest. And here's the truth of it. You might still not like to go to movies. Right? Just because I did this, not going to make you all of a sudden love movies. You might still not really like to go to the movies. But you know what? You might come with me anyway. You know why? Because now you're invested in me. You're invested in me. You actually care about me. So you might actually come do something that is not your favorite thing to do, but that I really want you to do with me. That's another reason why this builds that platform that you can then use to springboard off of and then start really challenging and stretching your children. If you go to your children and say, give me $50 and there's no money in the piggy bank, you're getting nothing. But if you come to your children and you've been putting quarters in there every hour for 3 weeks, and now you say, hey, can I borrow $50? It's sitting there. If you've put in the time, you've put in the connection. So now you're in a totally different position later on to really challenge your children to do something that may not be their favorite thing or that may be quite hard for them. So it really sets the whole stage for what you're looking for. Now, ironically, the only way to do that, though, is to really sincerely join without it being a con game that's designed to maneuver your child into a different behavior. When you're joining, you have to be 100% joining. Not joining so that in 10 minutes they'll look at you, but joining because it's like saying this. It's like instead of saying, stop doing what you want, do what I want, you're saying, I just want to be close to you because I love you. And you know what? If you like twirling pens, I am the pen man. I'm all about pens. You know why? Because I love you, and if you love pens, I love pens. And that then begins, ironically enough, you know what's so great about this? It actually, it builds relationships, and no, you're not teaching a specific skill, but it actually does begin to teach the very central point and deficit that our children are lacking, which is, remember, our children have difficulty creating relationships, and they're not naturally interested in what we're interested in, right? Partly, we want our children to start to be spontaneously interested in what other people are doing. So you don't teach that by saying stop doing what you're doing, do what I'm doing. That's the opposite of the skill we're trying to teach them. We teach them that by actually saying, oh, I'm really interested in what you're interested in, and that then begins to build the relationship where they then do learn to become more interested in what we're interested in. And again, that comes down to looking for the ism and joining in with the ism, not with everything, just with the ism. Now, what is an ism? An ism is actually, it's not that complicated. It's actually very similar to what many of you might think of as stimming behavior. The difference is that stimming refers to self-stimulating behavior. There's actually many reasons why our children do this behavior. Many, many reasons. Could be self-stimulating, could be very often self-calming. It could be to balance out a physiological imbalance. It could be to deal with a sensory integration issue that's happening. There's lots of different reasons that our children are doing this. So rather than saying, oh, they're self-stimulating, we say, oh, we name the behavior. It's called an ism. And an ism has 2 characteristics. Okay? And this is what you want to look for, because this is how you're going to look for how you know whether you're going to join or not. Okay? 2 characteristics. 1, it's repetitive. 2, it's exclusive. Let me just define those really quickly. Repetitive is pretty obvious, right? Repetitive, it's happening over and over again. But I would just encourage you to have a wide view of that, right? This looks very obviously repetitive. There's lots of other ways to be repetitive that aren't as obvious, right? Your child may look like he or she's playing with this toy over here, and doesn't look that different from the way a typical child might play with this toy. But if you step back and watch for 15 minutes, you'll notice that your child plays with this over here, and then goes over here, and then goes over here, and then comes back here, and then goes over here again, and oh, they're circuiting. They're actually circuiting around in a similar way, and they're not very flexible to change that. So that's repetitive also. Or you may have a child or a teenager or an adult that you're working with who has Asperger's syndrome, who's highly verbal and doesn't do any of this kind of stuff. But they love talking about airplanes, the engines, the wings, how they're built, right? So that's that child or adultism, right? So it's repetitive, and then secondly, probably even more importantly, it's exclusive. And exclusive, it's important to define it. It's a little hard to take sometimes for certain parents at first to really get what exclusive means, because by exclusive, we really mean your child is trying to tune you out. Now I know that it sounds hard to swallow because you love your child, and not everyone likes the idea of they're trying to tune us out. So it's important to understand your child's not trying to tune you out because they don't love you or they don't know that you love them. It's not personal in that way. Remember, there's all this unpredictability and sensory stuff coming in. They're trying to tune everything out, right? And just create a world that's digestible to them. So it's exclusive. How do you know it's exclusive? Because exclusive is not including you. Your child's not looking at you. They're not including you in what they're doing. They're not engaging with you in any way. Okay, so if it's exclusive, it's repetitive, then it's an ism, then you just join. You don't have to be, a brain surgeon. You don't have to come up with any brilliant new idea. It's actually quite easy to do once you let yourself do it, rather than thinking, is this being productive enough? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? Just join when that's happening. Just do. Get really involved in what your child's doing. In fact, try and get more involved than your child actually is. If I'm with a child who's doing this with a piece of paper, right, then what I do is I don't sit and go like, I say, oh, I bet you I can get more into that paper thing than this child is. So I might go, and I just focus all my energy and get really involved in it. And in a way, part of what I'm also doing is I'm saying, what do they see in this? I want to see what my child sees in this. And this is powerful. What you're going to actually see is, as you join, the biggest change you're going to see is the more you join, the more you're creating this relationship with your child, where your child is engaging with you more. That's the biggest thing. However, you're going to have other benefits too. A big one is you're going to start to unlock the door to what your child is actually doing and why. So many of these behaviors might look nonsensical to us, and we might not understand why our children's doing them. Of course we can't understand it, first of all, because you can't understand anything that you're trying not to look at and trying to squelch down and reduce. Right? So this is, we're looking at it with open eyes, and we're trying to see what our children see. And that actually, you will find, not in every case, but in many cases, you will start to finally understand what they're actually doing and what the reasons are. And our children have great reasons. We had this father who took the startup program, and he had a son named Jerry. Okay, and this dad, he was in many ways like a really typical dad, in that he really loved his son, but also really struggled with his son's autism and his son's differentness. And he's a great guy, really wanted to help his son Jerry. And he said, I remember it was about halfway through the startup program, he said, listen, a lot of these principles sound great. I like the idea of the playroom. That sounds excellent. But my son never ever looks at me or connects with me at all. However, when there's Legos around, when he's playing with Legos, he is so obsessive in the Legos that it's even more pronounced, and it's like I'm not even there, and he's just focusing in this really intense way on these Legos in a really repetitive way. And so how about if I do these other principles that you're saying, but if I'll just take the Legos out and leave the box of Legos outside the playroom so that he doesn't obsess on that all day. And we asked him why he wanted to do that. And this is a big piece too of how we teach, which is instead of saying, you know what, that's not what we do, that's wrong, don't do that, we wanted to understand why this was important to him so that we could be most helpful to him. So we asked him, well, how come you want to keep the Legos outside of the room? And he said, well, this is what I was just telling you, because he just totally focuses on them, obsesses on them, completely ignores me. And we said, no, we totally understand that's what he does. But how come you don't want him to do that? And he said, well, it's hard to watch. It's hard to watch him do that. And we said, why? And he said, because he's just being so autistic and he looks really different, and it's hard to watch because I really love my son. I just hate his autism. So when I watch that, it's like the autism's winning, and it's just hard for me. And that led to an amazing discussion that we have actually since had with many other parents. Many other fathers, many other mothers have had this exact discussion over this issue of, can you love your son or your daughter and hate their autism? It's something that we talk about a lot now because this father brought it up, and it's sort of touched a nerve for a lot of different parents. The thing that this father came to, which was really helpful for him, is that autism was maybe not forever, but for right now, here today, it was part of who his son was, right? It was like the hair growing out of his head. It was like the color of his eyes. It was who he was, right? I mean, can I say, hey, listen, if there's one thing I hate, it's blonde people. Oh, you're a nice lady though. You're my friend. Don't worry. Don't take that personally, right? I can't do that, right? Part of who you are is a blonde person. I can't hate blonde and love you at the same time. And this father really came to this idea, and then he really decided he wanted to embrace all of who his son was. So the startup program ends on Friday afternoon. This father goes home on Saturday morning to his son, really excited to be different with Jerry. So he decides, you know what, I'm going to really join him. He goes into his son's room and he takes this box of Legos, and just as he predicted, his son completely ignores him and just takes out these Legos and just starts really getting into the Legos. Now normally, his father would either then take away the Legos or just leave the room because he didn't like to watch this. So he didn't even really get to see exactly what his son was doing. But now he's going to be different. He's going to really join in with this. So he gets some Legos of his own, and he's like, okay, I don't pretend to know what he's doing, but I'm going to get really into this and join in with him. So he starts looking at his son and watching what his son's doing. And he notices his son build like an L-shaped figure. So he says, I don't understand why, but I'm getting really into this. I'm going to just join. So he builds an L-shaped figure. And then Jerry builds another L-shaped figure. So Jerry's father builds another L-shaped figure. And then Jerry takes these two L-shaped figures up, made out of Legos, starts holding them up like this, in like a square, and walking around the room and going, holding it up to the light. Now again, his dad's like, okie dokie, I don't know why this is happening, but I'm going to get as into it as he is. So Jerry's father starts walking around the room, holding it up to the light, going, and he's looking at his son, and he's getting into the activity, and he's doing it over and over again, and he's getting really focused on it, and he finally realizes that actually it wasn't what he initially thought. Jerry was not walking around the room looking through this little box he had created at the lights. That actually, when he really looked at what Jerry was doing, Jerry was actually holding it like this and kind of looking sideways into this box, looking at this side of the little shape he had created. And when Jerry's father looked at the side of his own box, when he held it up to the light, you know how Legos are kind of shiny, he actually found he could see a reflection of his own face. And when he held it up to the light and went like this and like this, it made his face fatter and skinnier, like he was at a carnival. And he's like, yes! This is awesome! I see the light. I get it. He's totally into it. He glances over at his son. Jerry has dropped the Legos and is looking at his father like this. Now, of course, Jerry was nonverbal at the time, but we could guess a thought like, Dad, I've been doing this for 3 years now. Are you just catching on now? So anyway, he's dropped the Legos. He's looking at his dad, looking straight at his dad. And his dad notices this, can't believe it. Can't believe his son's actually focusing on it. So it just freezes for a second, and he's getting so excited about it that he smiles. And to his complete surprise, Jerry smiles right back at him. And then really slowly, Jerry's father takes his hand up like this and just waves to his son. I mean, he's just sort of saying hi, doesn't think anything will come of it. And Jerry's looking at him, and he picks his hand up and he waves back at his dad. And they share this really sweet moment where they're looking at each other, they're smiling at each other, they're waving to each other, that really his father had never ever shared with Jerry before. And of course, then Jerry, a few minutes later, Jerry goes back into his Legos and Jerry's father joins him again. And it was this incredible moment that he realized he had this breakthrough with his son. It really sold Jerry's father on joining. And so over the ensuing weeks, actually, Jerry's father joined him more and more, whenever he could in what he was doing. As Jerry was joined in his focusing on his Legos and playing with the Legos, as he was joined over the ensuing weeks, actually, Jerry, number one, became more and more interactive with his father and with other people and spent more of his time interacting with other people and actually became less and less interested and reliant on the Legos. And ultimately, several weeks later, was actually doing about 45 minutes a day playing with these Legos, which was an activity that he used to be able to do all day if you left him with the Legos. He would just do it unlimited. So this was a huge piece and a huge sea change. And ultimately, what we can see is that the very activity that Jerry was doing to tune out his father actually connected with his son and also made it unnecessary for his son to then need to use this activity to tune his father out. And that let all other kind of breakthroughs in through the door and other kinds of breakthroughs with Jerry happen. Okay, so there's a lot of, and again, when your children are doing these activities, they're all gonna have different reasons, of course, right? That was Jerry's reason. There's lots of, a lot of times an ism can be curative or palliative. Palliative meaning to reduce pain, right? And we even had, there was a little girl named Carrie who used to flap her hands at the edge of her vision like this, especially when she was moving around the room. She would flap her hands. And of course, everyone who loved her, and her parents were really sweet, they adored her. One of the ways that they were trying to help her is whenever she would do that, they would gently push her hands down and say, quiet hands, right? Now, Carrie was examined by an eye doctor, an ophthalmologist. And this doctor found that her retina, there was a problem with her retina. We have, with both of her retinas, we have two kinds of receptor cells. We have cones and rods, right? Cones help us see straight ahead and color vision. Rods are black and white, peripheral, and depth perception. So what this eye doctor found was that Carrie had a problem with her rods, meaning she actually had inhibited depth perception. Couldn't really see depth and couldn't see her way around the room. However, and the doctor said this, we did not say this, the doctor said that when Carrie would flap her hands at the edge of her vision like this, it would actually stimulate and help build up her rods in her retina. So this little cutie, this little cute little girl, she's just trying to see her way around the room, right? And everyone around her who loves her and cares about her is constantly saying, quiet hands, put your hands down, quiet hands, right? There are reasons that our children do what they do. Let's look for the reasons instead of just trying to make them look like a typical child. Then we can really, really help them the way that we want to help them. In a sense, I could sum up this piece, this principle in this way. This is a big difference between the Sunrise program and a lot of more traditional modalities for working with children on the autism spectrum, which is more traditional modalities tend to focus on changing behavior. Okay, I see this child, how can I stamp out and get rid of these more autistic behaviors and promote these more typical behaviors? That's what you're asking yourself as you're focusing in that direction. I want to change this behavior. We focus on creating a relationship. So our question is different. Our focus is, how can we create a deeper relationship with this child first? And then we also have other things we want to teach this child. But first and foremost, how can we create more of a relationship with this child? The next principle is like, if joining is the right hand, this next principle is the left hand. And remember I was saying we don't join with everything, we only join with isms, because that's not the time to teach when our children are doing isms, that's the time to relationship build. So what happens is, when your child's being exclusive and ismy, you just join, until you have your child's willing engagement. Right? Until you have your child's willing engagement, then that's the time to start to build and challenge and teach more. Okay, so that's where this is one of, we have a number of ways, a lot of different ways that we teach and challenge children. This is one of the key ways. So, and again, this is once you have your child's willing engagement. And it's called facilitating skill acquisition by capitalizing on your child's own motivation. I know it sounds a little long and complicated. It's actually not. It basically means if you go with your child's interests, you can dramatically accelerate their learning curve. That's basically what it means. And there's a number of ways to make this happen. First of all, it's based on this idea, which I don't think is going to shock anyone here. Right? This is very different than joining. Right? A lot of people might fight you on joining. Nobody's going to fight you on this idea. Right? They're going to, when we say motivation is one of the largest factors for growth, nobody's going to argue with that. It's very widely acknowledged that when you teach someone in a way that's more motivating, or when someone is motivated, they will remember more, they'll have a longer attention span, they'll learn at a greater speed. That's commonly agreed upon. We didn't invent that. Okay. Here's the irony though. although it is widely acknowledged, it is very, very rarely used with any kind of consistency with children on the autism spectrum. Oftentimes we say, hey, listen, we'll worry about that stuff later. We just got to get this child like remotely caught up or toilet trained or whatever. We don't have time for motivation, right? But ironically, this is the very group of children and adults who can most benefit from this principle. And the reason for that is because with typical children, you can get away with teaching them in a way that is not motivating to them. Now, it's not the fastest way to teach them, but you can get some basic learning happening because you have a baseline level of interaction with a typical child. So even if they really hate what they're learning, they'll probably learn some of it. Right? Now, again, not my first choice, but you can get away with it with a typical child. With our children, we don't even have that basic level of interaction. So it's even more important that we teach in ways that are motivating for them. Okay? And the way that it tends to work is unfortunately the opposite of this. The way that we tend to teach tends to not match our children's motivation. And what we see over and over again is, let's say in typical situations where we try and say, okay, you're going to learn in this way. You're going to sit down here, we're going to turn to this page, or we're going to learn this subject first, or we're going to do it this way, right? You may be able to do that with some typical children. With our children, that is not going to match up with their motivation, and so it's going to very, very much slow things down. And what we see as we watch this happen is that traditional learning modalities will very rarely be motivating for our children. So what we do is we customize the presentation of the curriculum to match our child's highest area of interest. Okay? It doesn't mean you restrict what you teach at all. Right? You teach everything you want to teach, but you customize the presentation of those educational goals with what your child's own motivation is. Therefore, you end up using the skills and interests that your child already has rather than trying to teach against the grain. There are a number of ways to do this. First of all, the most simple way to explain it is if you have, say you have a little girl, right? Whether she is special needs or typical, doesn't matter. But let's say you're trying to teach her to count to 10, right? So you have her count 10 orange stickers that you put on a piece of paper, little orange circles. But wait a minute. Maybe this little girl really loves dinosaurs. So the question is this: will the little girl learn to count to 10 faster if you have her count 10 dinosaurs instead of 10 orange circles? What we say is, and what we see in practice is, yes, every single time. That girl will learn faster every time when she's counting 10 dinosaurs versus 10 circles. So it's based on that embryo of an idea. Now again, this can be applied. This is not limited to children who are nonverbal or children who are young or children who are learning a more simple skill. This is absolutely broad-based. It applies whether you have a nonverbal 3-year-old or a highly verbal 17-year-old who has Asperger's syndrome. Right? So an example, examples of both ends of that spectrum actually. We had a mother who had a little boy, and she really felt like she was at her wit's end by the time she got to the startup program. She was just really kind of burnt out, and one of her biggest things was, listen, I've been trying for 6 months to teach my son to be toilet trained, and not only is he still not toilet trained, but we are no closer than we were 6 months ago. And if anything, we're less close. And honestly, I don't know what to do from here. So we talked to her about this principle and about what to do and how to implement it. And we said, you need 2 things, okay? First is you need first is you need something that he's motivated by. Second is you need an educational goal. Now we have the educational goal. The goal is, let's say, urinating in the toilet, okay? So we asked her, okay, so what's something that your son is motivated by? And she said, I don't know. How am I supposed to know that? And we said, well, hold on one second. What does he do when no one else is trying to get him to do anything? Like, what does he do? What is he into? What does he spend time doing? And she said, lots of things. One of the things he's really into is steps and stairways. I don't really know why he likes to climb up and down them and build them, and he's into that. But honestly, I don't see how steps and taking a leak go together. And we said, well, guess what? They don't go together. We're going to make them go together. That's how this works. So we brainstormed with her a little bit, and then the startup ended on Friday afternoon. She gets home on Saturday morning, and she buys, real cheap, she just gets this this little 3-step wooden stepping stool, little 3-stepper. And she brings it in, and he's really excited to have this, and he immediately engages with her, and they start playing with it, and then she starts building more complicated games where she moves it around the room. She does this with him every day for 3 days, actually 2 days, and then the middle of the third day, she actually takes the stool, she pushes it up against the toilet, and has him climb up the 3 steps and wee in the toilet. 2.5 days, that's how long that took her. 2.5 days of focusing on that for something that she couldn't get in 6 months. Now I know, even when I say that, it can be hard to hear it because you're thinking, that actually, to be honest, sounds a little too fast. It sounds too good to be true. It sounds like, how could you make something that takes 6 months take 2.5 days? And that's why it's important to realize this is not magic. It is not mysterious. It's actually really clear how this works. This principle plays to your child's intelligence, as do most of the Sunrise Program principles, many of them that we're going to talk about, that I'm going to bring up, play to your child's intelligence. We know your children are already brilliant. They're already sharp. But they have other challenges, and they have difficulty engaging with people, so that isn't immediately apparent to everyone. But it's very apparent to us, and this plays to your child's intelligence. Did this little boy lack the intelligence to walk up to a toilet and urinate in it? No. Did he have some genetic no-pee in toilet disease? No, right? Of course this was possible, but just because his mother really wanted it for him, and we wanted it, didn't mean that he was just all of a sudden going to want it for him. He was okay doing it the way he did it. He was getting his diaper changed every day. Look, you guys agree to change my diaper every day, I'm going to stop using the bathroom, right? Everything was working fine for him. So what this mother did that was so amazing was she made this as motivating and as important to him as it was to her. And ultimately, actually, she was able to take away the stepping stool and have him just go in the toilet. And not just go in the toilet at home, but in other locations like in school and in other areas. That actually points out what is an additional benefit of utilizing this principle that I think is really, really important. This principle is very, very different, but often gets confused with what I'm going to just generically call the reward principle. Reward principle is very, very popular right now in the world of autism treatment. Right? The reward principle says, you do something that I like, or you do something that's important, or you demonstrate this skill, and I give you a reward. I give you a piece of food, or I let you play with a toy that you want to play with, and that's how we do it. And the focus often in those situations is on repetition versus motivation. So the idea is to repetitively teach and focus on this one skill and have the child demonstrate it enough times so you can write it down and prove that they've mastered the skill. Right? Now that it is very popular, and part of the reason why it's popular is because it actually does work. It does work to some degree, but at what cost? That's what I always ask. It does work. What's the cost of it working? And what I hear from parents all the time is, yes, my child does do these 5 things, and I'm glad they do them. I'm glad they do that. That's great. But my child looks like a robot when they're doing it. They look like they've been pre-programmed. There's no sense of joy and enjoyment. They very rarely generalize it to other areas when they're not getting the same kinds of prompts and rewards. And I'm trying to help my child be more spontaneous and also generalize these skills. And so